Well, from one talented young woman to another, in a different field altogether.
Last summer, we introduced you to Rachel Ignatowski, a rising young designer working on a series about women in science.
This summer, Rachel's delightful and sometimes surprising profiles of 50 female scientists was released by 10 Speed Press.
It's made the New York Times bestseller list, reason enough for us to look back on this piece from producer Ashley Holcroft.
There we go, that's good. There's Thor. See, I got to say pretty boy lips for smooching. They let me write whatever I want. It's a really, I love working with clients who trust me because then I get a lot of really cool work done.
Pretty boy lips for smoochin', bullets a daytime to evening look. Arc reactor may cause heartburn. Just some of the wonderfully creative fodder Rachel Ignatowski conjures in her creative Casey lair for one of her many high-profile clients. This time, it's for Fandango.com.
For the Avengers series, they kind of called me up and they were like, we would like to do something with the Avengers. We need it really quick. What do you want to do? So I said, oh, like, why don't we just do an anatomy of them? And they say, okay, thank you. And then I say, yay, and then they feature me. And that's it.
Which begs the question, how does one get on the mighty Fandango's carte blanche contact list? Well, there are a few things you need to know about Rachel. First off, she's been at this a while.
I knew I wanted to go into art when I was really young. So around 16 is when I got really serious about it, and I started going to pre-college classes and getting my portfolio together. And I always had an interest in science and biology. In fact, if I didn't go into art, I was gonna maybe become a doctor or something like that. But I liked art much better.
She's also passionate about gender equality, which made for a uniquely successful formula. That proved to be her golden ticket.
How my Women in Science series started was I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and we were sitting around and we're discussing, the gender gap that still exists. Science, mathematics, technology, engineering, those are all still very much boys' games. And so I started, researching it a little more, and I thought, I could, if I just draw these women in this sort of new whimsical way that no one's really doing right now, maybe that'll spark some people's interest in it. And also just to celebrate them so that people who have been inspired by these women can have them up on their wall and be like, oh, thank you, Barbara McClintock. You really, really inspired me. That's why I'm in genetics.
The series includes popular favorites like Dr. Jane Goodall, the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, to names and fascinating stories that have been buried in the history books, like the mother of the first complex computer code, COBOL, Grace Hopper, or pioneers of entire fields of science.
Mary Anning, who was pretty much the first paleontologist of her time, she found the first real full dinosaur skeleton. She wasn't allowed to be published because she was a woman. They weren't allowed to, and she was a poor woman at that. But she fought her way to get that information out there by being brave and becoming associated with noble gentlemen who then published that work for her and basically helped start that field.
From paleontology to the first person to ever win a Nobel Prize in 2 different fields of science.
Just Marie Curie, who's probably one of the best known ones. I mean, they didn't even want to give her her second Nobel Prize, and she also got very discredited because she was a woman and a foreigner to France. And you know what she did? She kept working, and then she drove a frickin' X-ray truck and helped soldiers with broken bones. And it's amazing. All the glass ceilings they had to break, all the rules they had to break to get to where they are and to accomplish what they accomplish. I think the best way to fight gender bias is through examples of strong females and to normalize women in positions of power.
So when International Women's Day rolled around, Instagram took notice and featured her series.
It was really taken off online. I have gone from having 1,500 followers to having over 40,000 followers. That has really motivated me to turn this into a book.
A book featuring 50 of these amazing women will be published in fall of 2016. But from that event, something even better happened.
I would come home from work and I felt like I was working another 40-hour week outside of work. And It started off as a little trickle where like the first thing that happened was people started buying stuff from my shop, and then all of a sudden I'm making rent, and then I'm making the same amount that I'm making at my day job. And then after that, everyone, all these different blogs and newspapers started picking me up, and I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but I always knew that something would happen if I worked hard.
So she quit her job at Hallmark and set off on her own. Now she happily spends her days researching and drawing.
I'm just so happy that I make a living doing this kind of work where I learn every day, and it's like, I feel like I retired. It's nuts. Like, I feel like I'm like Coca-Cabana, except sitting in my room and researching and drawing.
So far, she's worked with dozens of clients, from independent films to childhood cancer research organizations, breaking down complex science into understandable infographics, similar to what she does in her anatomy series, which includes what happens to the brain in love, the novel workings of the heart, cell structure, and many more. But there was one in particular that struck a special chord.
A while ago, I got this little piece of fan mail from this father who bought my respiratory system print, and his daughter has CF. And so she's 4 years old and she has to use a respirator at night. So he emailed me saying, thank you so much, because everything else that's out there kind of looks scary. And yours is all cuddly and happy, and she understands. It really calmed her, and he was happy that he could have that moment with his daughter. And it's one of those things where you're like, wow, illustration is a tool to help connect people with information that seems scary and dense and unapproachable. I think there's a way to start conversations by putting smiley faces on some cells. It's been amazing. It's been like, we'll see what happens next.